you peace from God our Father, from our blessed Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. How many of you know the name of the person whose picture is on the bulletin cover today? Tim who? Gunn. Tim Gunn. All right, we've got a few out here then that know. He's one of the main characters on one of these reality television shows entitled Project Runway. And again, if you know Tim Gunn, you probably know Project Runway, which I have to admit was one of those shows that I love watching and still do. It kind of seems unusual for me, a pastor, being hooked on fashion design, but yes, that's true. And even if you watch the show, you know where they go to Moods for to buy the fabric, and I've been there in New York City, so that tells you about where I'm at. But of course, in this TV show, each week the contestants are to design an outfit based upon the theme. And of course, one person wins and one person who loses is sent home. And Tim Gunn serves as this kind of a mentor for those contestants. And he kind of helps them through the process of coming up or maybe working with their design. And once in a while, some of those contestants really just have a problem trying to come up with a theme or trying to just get it to work out. And so Tim, as the mentor, will try to help it, not give it away. And usually he'll say something to the effect, his famous piece of advice to all of these contestants is, make it work. Do what you have to do to finish the project. Just make it work. And in a way, that probably describes the message today in that Old Testament reading. It's kind of a strange lesson there from Jeremiah. It talks about, I'm going to read just portions of it again, but it says, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Now, backtracking that, for several hundred years, God had warned his people, the Jews, that he was becoming displeased with their kind of lackadaisical attitude towards religion and then even showing their faith in their words and deeds. In review for some of the people of, we're the children of God. It doesn't matter what we say or do. God's going to like us. And God said, that's not the way it is. I want to see genuine worship on your part, and I want to see your faith in action. And of course, they didn't. And God warned there would be consequences if you don't listen to me and to the prophets. And eventually, God kind of reached his limit with his children, the children of Israel, and he allowed their neighbors, the mighty Babylonian Empire, to defeat his people. And in the process, the great city of Jerusalem was pretty much destroyed. The temple that Solomon had built, been there for hundreds of years, that temple was just completely destroyed. And many of the better educated or people who had talents and abilities, many of them were taken out of Jerusalem and sent to different camps all throughout the Babylonian Empire. It was a very humiliating defeat for the children of Israel. And it was a wake-up call. And you see that verse that is on our cover today, that by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion, from Psalm 137, a psalm that was written while the children of Judah there were in exile, remembering what they once had and now had been taken from them. And yes, the people were sorry now. Sorry they didn't listen to God. Sorry they didn't listen to these prophets. And yes, they have repented of their sins, but God said, it's too late. You still are going to be here in exile for a long, long time. And God said, it will not last forever and ever. There will be a time when it will end. And more than that, I am going to go with you into that exile. I will still be your God. But you better prepare for a long stay in this foreign country. And even Jeremiah, the prophet, who wrote these words, a prophet of God, he too was led into captivity with the nation where he continued to minister to them. And so basically, God is telling the people through Jeremiah the prophet today, make it work. Make the best of the situation that you find yourself in. It's interesting that we have a lesson today dealing with exiles or people who have been forced out of the country. I read this past week. There are now over 30 million people in the world today who have been forced out of their homelands. People in resettlement camps trying to find a place to live, either because of civil war or famine or whatever else, but 30 million. And unfortunately, that number is going up and up. Just watching the news this morning, you see now even there in Turkey, hundreds and thousands of Kurds being forced now to leave, looking for home. And that's why I think these words that we have, this text today, still has somewhat meaning for us today. Even if we're not facing exile ourselves, these words have meaning for us. And as I was looking at this text, there are 4 points that I want to kind of share with you that come to my mind as I heard and worked on this lesson. The first point is, God has expectations as to how we are to live, meaning we are to live as his children. It says there in that psalm, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat and wept. And I guess for some of those Jews, the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, their homeland, being forced now to live in a foreign country, learn a new language, that might have come across as a surprise to them, a shock. But the truth is, God had warned them over and over and over. This is what will happen if you don't start practicing and living the faith. And I think that has meaning for us today too. God wants us to believe and to trust in him as the way of salvation. But that faith has to show itself in words and deeds. It can't be just an intellectual thing that we keep up here. It's got to be shown. And you've heard me quote it, and I'll say it again, these famous words from the prophet Micah, who said, he has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Live out your faith. That's what the Jews failed to do. And God is telling us today, live out your faith, that faith that you have. You belong to me. Therefore, I have every right to expect that you will still reflect my goodness and my love by what you do and how you interact with other people. And everyone who comes into contact with you, they should be given just a small glimpse of who I am as they see and observe you. Paul said we are his workmanship, created for good works for him. That is our calling. That is our duty and our job. I expect to see good fruits when I look at you. The second point that I think we can find in this lesson today is that God works in entirely different ways and times from how we work. You know, again and again in that lesson, God is telling the people, you're going to be here for a long time. In fact, you're going to be there for several generations. Those that were led into captivity, they will not go home. They will die in a foreign land, and their children might die in a foreign land. It might be the third and the next generation before they will finally be able to go back to Jerusalem. Therefore, you're going to have to make it work. And you're going to have to realize that my schedules for doing things are different from yours. And we need to be reminded of that, because we sometimes feel that we can manipulate or force or make God to do what we want to do in the time and the way. And if we don't, we're going to hold our breath. We're going to turn against you, God. We're going to give up on you. God said, it doesn't work. You can hold your breath all you want, but I am only going to work according to my time schedule. And while it might seem that I'm dragging my feet, just as I told my children, I'll go with you into exile, into slavery, so too, God says, I will go with you through matter whatever you go through in life. And so we find ourselves in a foxhole like in war. God says, I'm right there with you. As David said, as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God says, I'm walking side by side with you. It was God who also joined Jonah in the belly of the great fish. And it is God who also comes and laughs and celebrates with you and your family when you gather for family celebrations. You know, the psalmist said, where can I flee from you, O Lord? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the outermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and guide me, meaning I can't get away from you. God is with us. Sometimes we feel that we've been abandoned because things just aren't working the way that we expect or we want them to work. And so our conclusion is God must have just gotten tired of me. He walked away. I'm on my own. I'm sure many of those people in exile that day in Babylon felt that way. The prophet Elijah felt that he was the only believer left in Israel and that he too was going to be abandoned by God. And so often we feel we have been abandoned for God. We forget the promise that God says, I will be with you always, even to the end of the world, no matter what we go through. God will be with us. We have to realize it too, that God will do what he is going to do according, though, to his time and schedule. The third point that I see in this lesson is that as important as we are to God, God has plans for us. But at the same time, you are not the center of the universe, and you are not the center of God's existence. God doesn't exist just to please and satisfy your every whim, your every little want and need. He says, I have plans for you. And sometimes those plans that I have for you also involve other people too, meaning the fact that we are all joined together, all interconnected with one another. You don't just live in some isolated world where it's just you and your family and God. Sometimes what God permits or allows to happen in your life is not only for your sake, but also for others. And things that can happen in their life can also have direct or indirect application and meaning to you in your life. And again, we're saying, well, God, why can't you just stop and just take care of this little problem? And God said, yes, because that little problem is also tied in with this and with this and with this family and that family, and it's all part of some divine plan. And maybe what you're going through is also to help you, but also to be of help to someone else. And again, we can't make sense out of it. We can't understand, well, I still don't understand why you can't just take care of my little problem. And God says, it's because it's part of a larger picture that you don't know. And we can't always make sense out of what the plan is for us. But God says, just trust me. It will all come about in the time. And the last point I see in this lesson is that it does seem to kind of help to answer or put into perspective the answers that God gives to prayers. You know, we know the three answers that God gives to prayer: yes, no, and the difficult one, wait. And it's easy sometimes to figure out the yes and the no, and we love it when God finally does things the way that we want him to do it at the time we want him to do it. And while we might get angry and mad at God when he says no, at least we get an answer. But sometimes the real struggle, though, is the problem of wait. Because there is no yes and there is no no. And that seems to be kind of irritating to us. It's almost as if God is kind of just stringing us along. Again, just tell me, Lord, one way or the other. And God says, again, I can't always, and I'm not going to always reveal. And yes, you might have to wait a long time before I finally say yes. Just like for those people there that were praying that God would deliver them, and some 70 years later, God finally did deliver his people and brought them back home to Jerusalem. But sometimes the answer after a long wait is no. And God says, and I don't owe you an explanation, I don't owe you any reason to explain why. This is where faith has to take hold and help us. In the book of the prophet Habakkuk, we read, "For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It is surely to come. It will not delay." Meaning the fact God will work out things according to his plan, what he knows. But sometimes we just have to wait. And wait until we see it. Remember, God gave the promise to Adam and Eve that a Messiah was going to be born. And thousands of years after that, God finally, we would say finally, but according, as Paul said, but in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem and to save us. And again, God says, my times are not your times, but I kept my word. And of course, we get impatient. And God knows the difficulties that we have sometimes of waiting, because we're just not creatures built to wait. But God says, just trust me. Let me prove it to you again and again. The words of Isaiah. But they who wait for the Lord, no matter how long it takes, those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. And God says, I will give you the patience, the understanding, to help you get through these situations. If you just turn to me and ask. As Tim Gunn would say, and I'm sure Jeremiah the prophet today would nod in agreement with Tim, saying, make it work. Let God do his work at his time, because he will never abandon you. In his name we pray. Amen. And now may the peace of God, which is above all understanding, preserve, keep us in our faith. May we always see the hand of God at work in our life. And may we also be able to live with our Lord in the joys of heaven. Amen.